This war was being carried on the backs of black Africans. For the Letov campaign alone, the British recruited over 1 million black porters. 1 in 5 died from malnutrition and disease, death rates comparable with those on the Western Front.
They endured their ordeal quietly. They only had duties and hardly any rights. They tumbled into the splashing mud with their heavy loads and were then ruthlessly forced to move on and catch up.
Oh, the Lindy Road was dusty and the Lindy Road was long. But the chap what did the hardest graft, who could not do but wrong, was the Cavarondo porter with his Cavarondo song. It was, "Come here, porter." It was, "Amera, here, yeah." And Amera didn't grumble. He simply did his bit.
What Smuts saves on the battlefield, he loses in hospital. For it is Africa and the climate we're really fighting, not the Germans.
Out of 20,000 South Africans, over half were invalided home by the beginning of 1917. They were replaced by black troops from Nigeria and Ghana. Recruitment of blacks soared in East Africa as well. Over the course of the war, the King's African Rifles rose from 3,000 men to 35,000. Fuloliani Longwe spoke for many black soldiers.
Think of yourself buried in a hole with only your head and hands outside, holding a gun, death smelling all over the place. Listen to the sound of exploding bombs and machine guns, smoke all over, and the vegetation burnt, and of course deforested. Watch your relatives getting killed, crying, finally dead. These things we did, experienced, and saw.
Letov survived undefeated to the very end, marching triumphantly through Berlin in 1919. The British never caught him, even though they turned it into an African war and set an army on his tail. But Britain and France had such reserves of manpower in their colonies that from 1914 they shipped them to Europe. Remarkable French colour photographs of the world that came to serve on the Western Front. French General Charles Mangin had calculated that France could raise up to 300,000 from her empire for Europe. No one believed him. But in fact, they mobilized double that number.
Black troops have precisely those qualities which are demanded in the long struggles of modern war. Endurance, tenacity, the instinct for combat, the absence of nervousness, and an incomparable power of shock. Not only do they enjoy danger, a life of adventure, but they are also essentially disciplinable.
People started hiding and running away from the camp. There were all kinds of illnesses, even psychological illness. People didn't know where they were going or even why they were fighting. There were rumors that we would never come back, that we are going to be sold as slaves.
India provided Britain with 1.75 million men in the war. They'd been thrown into some of the toughest fighting from the start. One Indian wrote to a friend,
"The war is a calamity on 3 worlds and has caused me to cross the seas and live here. The cold is so great that it cannot be described. We have not seen the sun for 4 months. Thus we are sacrificed. I have neither sleep by night nor ease by day. There can never have been such a war before, nor will there ever be again.
Some men, like Jason Jingo, used to the habitual racism of colonial rule, returned home with greater self-esteem.
We had liked our time in France. It was our first experience of living in a society without a color bar. We were different from the other people at home. Our behavior, as we showed the South Africans, was something more than they expected from a native. We had copied the manners and customs of the Europeans, and not only copied, we lived them.
But it wasn't the same Africa Jason Jingo and the other survivors came back to after the war. The empires which once carved it up had now turned parts of it into a wasteland, as German medic Ludwig Deppe realized.
Behind us we leave destroyed fields and, for the immediate future, starvation. We are no longer the agents of civilization. Our path is marked by death, plundering, and deserted villages.
It would be years before African nationalism took off, but a few had begun the journey. In 1914, John Chilembwe challenged the basis of the war and Africa's place in it. And his words would haunt colonial officials for years to come.
Let the rich men, bankers, titled men, storekeepers, farmers, and landlords go to war and get shot. Instead, the poor Africans who have nothing to own in this present world, who in death leave only a long line of widows and orphans in utter want and dire distress, are invited to die for a cause which is not theirs.
Germany had fought a remarkable global war. But it cost her cruisers, her wireless network, and all her colonies. Yet Germany had forced Britain and France to call on their empires and lean on their allies. In the process, these flexed their muscles and formed empires of their own. The First World War saw the last scramble for Africa. And the ideas the Kaiser had so hated, land grabbing, avarice and capitalism, had in fact been spread wider. For the moment, imperialism looked more successful than it had ever been.